Hi there, and welcome to Texture Notes. I'm Tevis, and in this video, I'm going to talk about every book, show, and game that I experienced this past winter. It's 35 things total, in the order that I encountered them. I'm also going to rate each of them between 1 and 10, and I'm going to briefly explain what those numbers mean. I've been keeping lists and ratings like this for many, many years, and I've received a lot of questions since I started putting them on my website about 5 years ago. So I hope this and the next video, my spring catalog, can provide a range of examples for what I mean when I give something a 4 or a 5 or a 6, when I go high with a 9 or a 10, or very low with a 2 or a 1. Numbers are emotional, and this winter was fortunately a season where I had a full range of emotions, so I have examples of all 10 numbers here. I'm also doing this video to prepare for another video in the fall about how we judge our media experiences. You know, unlike my other videos so far, that one that I'm working on will be an argument, maybe a thorny one, maybe kind of disagreeable and annoying. But it's an argument I've long wanted to make, to really lay out and make the strongest case for it that I can. I've been thinking a lot about ratings lately, about how different people judge them, and after you watch this video, I'd really like to know more about your own way of rating things, if you do that. You know, what scale you use, what your numbers mean, how they change between mediums or over time. And if you don't rate things as explicitly as I do, I'm also curious as to why. So if you'd like to share any of this in the comments, that would be great. I'd really appreciate it. It would be really quite helpful to me in thinking through this argument that I'm working on. My original goal with this video was to get it under an hour, and I did try. I really tried. It can really take a long time to make something short. And even though I failed this time, I did experiment with the length in a few ways. So of these 35, a bunch of them will be short, 30 seconds to a minute. Another bunch will be slightly longer, closer to 2 minutes. And then a select few, will go longer, 4 or 5 minutes. And there's one that's super long. My goal here obviously isn't to give anything comprehensive or even much analysis, really. Some of these I may return to in an end-of-the-year best-worst video. My goal here instead is to catalog all 35 and give a sense in the aggregate for what I value, how I think through, feel through books, shows, and games, how I judge them. So I'll start by saying that this January was just about the strongest start to a year I can remember in a very long time, like across the board. Each year as the fall semester ends and I get a bit more time to myself, I usually dive into a bunch of random stuff and some holdovers from the previous year, usually to very mixed results. But this January, across media, I encountered so much good stuff, some potential all-timers even. So, the first book I read in January was Fear of Seeing, A Poetics of Chinese Science Fiction by Song-Ming Wei. And I thought this was a 6. For me, a 6 means that I liked it, basically. Anything 6 and above on my scale is going to be something that I liked. There's not a true middle of mine. 5 is not the middle because I don't use 0. So 1 to 10, the middle is really between 5 and 6. So anything 5 and below, I don't. And this, I liked it. Didn't love it. But it's a good, solid overview of Chinese science fiction the past few decades. It has a few interesting deep dives into particular famous titles. It's written with this kind of stiff enthusiasm that I found endearing. It's too vague with its politics, too indirect for me, and it is too easy on Liu Cixin, who wrote The Three-Body Problem. Too easy on him and his sexism. It calls him the manliest man in Chinese science fiction, but doesn't really push it hard enough to me. Still, I thought it was a good overview with some good recommendations. I liked it. The first show that I watched in January was season 1 of The Pitt, and I thought it was an 8. 8 for me means great. It means I really liked it. I didn't realize that The Pitt was kind of an old-fashioned humanistic drama, but it is. It's quite moving, and it has a healthy dose of competence porn mixed in. And The Pitt really moves, and not just because it's shot in real time, that crisis that real time gives you. It moves between genres very deftly. In one moment it is a moving medical drama. In another moment it's a work of body horror. It's a real-time thriller. It is a character study and a kind of topical social issues show. It is an office sitcom with light comedic elements. It's basically a soap opera, but it really works to make the ER a kind of microcosm of the human life world on what is many of the patients, as Dr. Whitaker I think says, the worst day of their life. The show also really moves between like registers of speech, between like modes of address. You'll have a doctor talking on the one hand to the patient in a certain way, and then talking to their family in a different way, talking to their colleagues in yet a different way, to their boss, to the trainees, I mean Dr. Robbie especially. And this constant shifting of address I found pretty thrilling as well. I do think that the Pitt can get a little heavy-handed. When I rewatched a few episodes with my partner, it's a little on the nose at times, but still, it's a really great first season. Really enjoyed it. Next was the first novel I read this year, and that was Yesterday by Juan Imar. And this was a 9. 9 for me means it's a best of the year. I don't usually in any given year have more than 10 nines in a medium. So a top 10 will almost always include anything I give a 9 to, and this is that good. Yesterday has a really modern voice. I was shocked when I realized it was 100 years old. And this probably has something to do with the excellent translation by Megan McDowell. This is a novel that asks, what if you had an epiphany while you were in the bathroom? A profound insight about life, about the unreal sequentiality of time, as the novel puts it. But then you forgot that epiphany. Your mind begins to spiral, and the novel itself spirals, trying to grasp this lost revelation, trying to get it back. I mean, ultimately, the main character in Yesterday is just trying to make sense of a day, one day. And this epiphany they have about time and the day itself, it keeps slipping away out of their grasp. So this is kind of the novel of the anti-epiphany, and I found it terrifying and comic and thrilling. It was a clear 9 to me. Next, now I don't usually come to these very often. This is very early in the year. But the first game I played in 2026 was Baby Steps. It was released last year. I mentioned it in my last video, and it's a 10. This was a bit of a shock to me because I was aware of this game before I played it. And yeah, 10 means for me not just one of the best of the year, but one of the best of many years of, it becomes kind of an essential work to me. Now, Baby Steps, one of the first things about it that's so important is it's a landmark of video game physicality. The body of Nate, the body you control, is unlike any other, and it is a profound kind of, not rethinking of avatars, but pushing some of the things we've been thinking about avatars forward, and difficultly so. Like Baby Steps has the title. It's a great title, perfect title. And it does this not just with the body of Nate, but the world that he is walking through, taking these steps. The textures of this game, the surfaces, are unbelievable. The dirt Nate starts walking in, the mud he gets mired in, the rocks he uses for steadying himself, the moss on those rocks, which undermines them completely, sand he encounters later on, snow, ice. All of them require different steps. All of them require, really taking into account material surfaces, materiality. This game is deeply concerned with this, and I absolutely loved it. I love the world. This is like, it looks like an open world, but it wraps around like an old school video game. You go out the right side of the screen, you come in the left. It is like that. I don't really know how they did it and pulled it off. That you can wrap around in this game, and it feels totally natural. The world's unbelievable, and it means that there's not one path forward. The uncertainty of this game as you're taking your steps, it's not like, I just need to do these hard things and it's all okay, there's the goal. You're not even sure if you're going the right way half the time, or if you're going through these laborious motions to what end. You don't know, and it's amazing. The ending of this game is perfectly realized. In fact, the whole game, it's narrative. Like, I'm focusing on the movement and the world and the body, the materiality, but the narrative of this game, it's both extremely funny, so funny. Nate's voice work is amazing. I mean, all the voice work is good, but Nate, I've never heard someone talk like that in a game. I have in life. I've had in my own head, and it's just phenomenal. And it's so funny, and yet there's a great deal of pathos in this game. There is a moment involving a wish that made me tear up. It caught me off guard, and I was like, I'm playing this game not I don't think I'm gonna cry. I don't cry in many video games. Video games aren't great at that. And yeah, this wish. Oh yeah, this game is fully realized. Yes, it's got slapstick in the bodies. It's funny both in the writing and in the falls. As Nate falls and you fall again and again. You just at some point can't get mad. You have to laugh. It's ridiculous, and yet you get back up. I saw a lot of discourse on this game about difficulty, like it challenged them to rethink why they do what they do in games, why they play hard games. And I gotta say, it's really smart about masculinity, and it's really thoughtful about difficulty. And I appreciate that, but I didn't relate to that. I gotta say, I love difficult games, but I don't have any issues with it. Like, for instance, the Manbreaker. This is a famous, like, difficult climb you can do in the game near the end, where you can go up this terrible path up a cliff, or you can take the stairs. I didn't even think twice. I took the stairs immediately, which is what you get an achievement for. I mean, the game is not going to reward you with an achievement for doing the hard thing. And it's great, but I don't know, that it wasn't personal for me. I was obviously going to take the stairs. I've been playing games for more than 40 years. So I don't know at what point this happened. I don't have anything to prove. Like, what could I have to prove in a video game at this point? I don't know. And as much as I love games, as much as they activate me, they do not get at that aspect of me or make me like do ridiculous things, or like if I do it because I want to, or there's enjoyment in the thing, I have no pride about it. I don't know. The game is so good that even one of its biggest selling points meant, personally very little to me, and it didn't matter. I just appreciated it, but I took the stairs. No problem. Now, I'm going to go back and probably, having beaten that, there's many things I want to explore. Some of them will be hard. I just want to feel it out a little bit more because it's so amazing. This game is meditative. For all of its difficulty, the true trick of it, outside of certain sections, is getting in a rhythm, walking without thinking, finding that way of walking so that it's not a torturous fall every 2 steps, is really what the game trains you for. Then you can handle all the different surfaces and other challenges. It really made me think about footholds, this word. I've been thinking about it a lot lately, footholds in the world. Nate has an incredible body in terms of his strength, his ability to plant a leg and have a foothold in the world. I love looking at his squishy butt. I mean, it's an amazing body. Yeah, Baby Steps is to me like the very rare complete work of art. Fully realized, utterly singular game. It's the game to beat this year. I don't know what's going to be better than this. And one of the best games in years. One of the best modern games. Completely amazing. That's a 10 to me. The next book I read was House of Day, House of Night by Olga Tokarczuk, translated by Antonia Lloyd-Jones from the Polish original. I thought this was a 4. 4 means basically that I didn't like it overall, despite appreciating parts. Here, this book is all parts. This is a fragmented kind of story cycle, not even really stories always. It's about a Polish village, a small Polish village, so that anchors all these fragments. These little sketches and essays that all come together to describe this village. And like with Tokarczuk's other works I've read, Flights and Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead, which is my favorite, there's such intelligence on each page. I just enjoy spending time with her mind. But in this case, that mind, it gives this sameness to all these fragments that kind of flattens the world of the village. It's not like a diverse motley crew of fragments. The essayist mode it kind of works in most of the time works against the collage technique. And even worse, I found the whole thing kind of bloodless. There was a lack of heat. There was a remove and a distance in these fragments and in Tokarczuk's approach and voice. I struggled to finish this. There was one through line it was kind of a proto-trans story about a monk who wanted to be a nun. This was pretty engaging. I did enjoy other parts, but not the whole. It did not work altogether, and I found it pretty disappointing. Next, I read Autobiography of Red by Anne Carson, and this was an 8. I've been reading a lot of Anne Carson lately and really enjoying her. This book, Autobiography of Red, mixes the ancient and the modern, kind of juxtaposes and melds them in a way that Anne Carson is so good at. It's taking a minor classic figure in Geryon and bringing it to life, investigating it in a kind of philosophical way. There's a philosophy of red going on here. This is, got its own history in philosophy that has qualia. But Anne Carson's looking at red patience, red victimhood smeared across a life. The chapter titles of this are great. The queerness of the book, the use of moods. I did at the end feel a little, it's not unfinished, but I felt like something a little more. What's there is great, and I really enjoyed it. But I don't think I've found my favorite Anne Carson yet. This is probably my favorite as of now of all that I've read. I think there's probably something I'll like even more. The next novel was Pale Fire by Vladimir Nabokov. Now, I've read a few things of his, Lolita, and some shorter pieces, parts of Speak Memory, but not a lot. And Pale Fire I kind of toyed with reading over many years. Finally did. It's a 5. Now, a 5 to me can mean a few things. It does mean that overall I didn't like it slightly. But it's usually a mixed thing. And the mix here is, on the one hand, it is an extremely funny book. It's so funny. It's got those pleasures, the Nabokov's language pleasures and just the humor of it. And I also found it kind of pointless. This is a book where, there's a poem that the whole novel is a series of footnotes by Dr. Kinboat, apparently, who is kind of taking over the poem through his footnotes and telling his own story. And I gotta say, Kinboat is just like one of the fussiest little bitches I've seen in a book in a long time. And I know this because I can be a fussy little bitch. I mean, I see him, I'm seen by him. And yeah, it's easy to read. It's, the conceit can sound kind of heady, but no, it's pleasurable. There's some parts about his homeland of Zembla that are a little boring, but it's very compelling. But I kept asking myself, why am I reading this little man, Kinboat? Like, why am I reading this little misogynist? Funny as he is. The language games that this is playing, the tricks, all of the gaminess of this, I just felt like Nabokov is kind of high on his own supply. This is not like Lolita exactly. I was actually thinking about language games and like where they do work. I think of something like Ulysses, right? Ulysses is both highly experimental and gamey and overreaching in its prose. That's the kind of Stephen Dedalus of Ulysses. And then it's mixed with the sad decency of Leopold Bloom, right? And he fortunately dominates. And the book is actually, a meeting of these two sensibilities, the younger Stephen and the middle-aged Bloom, and this kind of foster father-son relationship, lost sons and fathers grieving, and it's so moving and so gorgeous. And but when you bring these two together, it makes the gaminess, the overreaching of Stephen, the language stuff, sing that decency, that sadness. It makes it burn in, immortality, as Nabokov would like, light of my life. There are some, in Pale Fire, some, true aspects to the immigrant experience, this personality, his relation to his homeland and trying to evoke it, but he's misremembering, delusional, trying to represent it, excited by anybody who knows anything. I know that, and there's something there in the title. This is one of the best. Pale Fire is the best part of the book. The title is better than the book. Pale Fire is an amazing title. But the whole book is just a game, I felt in the end. I felt more sympathy for Humbert and Lolita, who is a monster, than for Kinboat here. And you just can't play games with a person like this. I don't mean Nabokov, but Kinboat. You can't play games. To play is to lose. And so I just came away feeling like, kind of throwing up my hands like, that was a little fun, but why? It didn't leave a good taste in my mouth, and it's actually not that memorable, weirdly. Yeah, it was mixed, but mixed is generally not great for me, so it was a 5. The other game that I played in January was Arc Raiders, and I felt this extraction shooter was a 7. 7 means I liked it a lot at times, but I had a few reservations, some kind of serious. The drama of Arc Raiders is very strong. It's full of close calls, spectacular failures. There's always this danger every time you play, the fragility, the live moments amidst all these happenings around you, the arcs and other players. The sound design of this game is tremendous. The map variety is great as well. The enemies The arcs are really interesting, especially when they get wounded. They become very erratic, even more unpredictable and alive. And what I'd heard about this game before was true for me too, which is that the other players you encounter are quite nice. You encounter the kindness of virtual strangers all the time, and it's really thrilling. But for me, the arc of this game, it declines rapidly towards the end game. It starts pretty good, the middle is very strong, but by the end, the missions were becoming too similar, progress was too incremental, and I didn't want to fight the big arcs, these giants on the landscape that I, tiptoed around. Getting into big fights with them just wasn't as interesting as existing around them. Not because of pacifism, but just, I don't know. I just wasn't very motivated. I was kind of petering out at the end. I might return again to this later this year. I did check out a map this spring, a new map they had, and I know these things change over time. Even my score can change within a given year. When I first played Fortnite, the first month I played it, I was like, oh, it's a 7. I like this. And then every month it kept going, oh, 8, oh, 9. By the summer, when the rocket launched and it went wild, I was like, this is a 10, oh my god. I don't think Arc Raiders is going to quite do that, but maybe when I return to it, it will change. I'm not sure. Right now, it's a 7. The next book I read was Abolish the Family by Sophie Lewis, and this was another 8, which means I thought it was great. It means I really, really liked it. This is a manifesto, and it is a thrilling, bracing one. I love a good manifesto. And Sophie Lewis has such like a reasonable voice for a manifesto. She's making a seemingly unreasonable call in the title, but her voice, the first chapter is called But I Love My Family. Like, she's really recognizes her audience and what she's trying to argue here. She's very honest, too, about strong counter-arguments, ones that she doesn't have great responses to. She incorporates all that while still producing an amazing manifesto that is super approachable despite its academic sourcing. The primary thesis here is that the nuclear family is a technology for privatizing care. When I first heard this, I never quite heard it put that way, but I was like, wow, yes. I know the contradictions of being a parent. I know the trap of family. I know all of that. What are other ways we might structure care in society instead of privatizing it through the nuclear family? The only small criticism I have is that it was a bit too short, a bit too undeveloped in the end. I mean, as a manifesto, it maybe would have lost some of its punch to it. I didn't want a big tome. I didn't want, a comprehensive book. Maybe just a little more, a little fuller vision, a little more elaboration. But what's here is excellent. And I'm going to read more of Sophie Lewis going forward. I really like her approach and her thinking and her writing. The other show that I watched in January was Orel, all 3 seasons of it, back from the 2000s. And I thought it was a 7. So this is another 7 where I really liked it in some ways, yet like Arc Raiders, it's the end that kind of brings it down. Obviously, I really care about endings. This will become very clear as I talk through more of these. What Orel is, it's a claymation satire about small-town American Christianity. And I hesitate to even call it a satire because to me, its strength is that it really just takes some ridiculous beliefs and takes them to their logical endpoints. So even if those ends, like zombies or impregnating a whole town, seem ridiculous and satirical, the belief that it's stemming from, that it's growing out of, is as ridiculous. And I appreciate the show would take this all the way. Orel himself, the main character, his decency and his innocence and often stupidity, I didn't find him that exaggerated. His whole mentality was not that exaggerated to me. I've known many Orels in my life. It takes this really interesting turn in the final season, a storytelling turn where it kind of begins to circle this primal moment in the woods, and I've not seen many shows willing to upend their formula so radically as Orel does. It really understands its characters while not letting them off the hook for their awfulness, and then it takes this formally kind of experimental approach towards these characters and towards the whole show as we've known it. Yeah, it's exciting, despite the fact that this is a really a feel-bad show, like a rigorously feel-bad show. And unfortunately, this radical turn is not completed because I think the show got canceled. It didn't finish itself. It didn't finish its vision. So the ending, the very end, feels rushed. And it's too bad. It kind of falls apart just when it was getting the most interesting. And this holds it back to me from, as a show, being a full success. I did enjoy it, but just not enough to be beyond a 7. Finally, the last book I read And the best book I read in January was Elena Knows by Claudia Pinheiro, translated by Frances Riddle. This was a 9 to me. Now, this is a story of an elderly mother who has an adult daughter who seems to have committed suicide. She is found hanging in the rafters of a church, and Elena does not believe she committed suicide, that she could commit suicide. The problem is, she wants to prove this wrong. She wants to solve this mystery, and she has an extreme form of Parkinson's. So she has trouble taking steps. She has trouble with basic movements. She has to watch her medication very carefully so she doesn't totally lock down. Her neck is kind of frozen with her head looking down. So you are trapped with her in her body as she's trying to solve the mystery of her own daughter's death with very limited means, but powerful will to do this despite that. And this whole book is about that body, not just Elena's body, her daughter's body, other bodies, the way that the body can betray you and the way you try to control it and control the bodies of others. It's specifically about women's bodies. Yeah, I don't want to say too much about what it's about because there's a great deal of surprise in it, and it is a mystery novel. Let me say that the title of this book, Elena Knows, is one of the single best titles I've encountered in forever. I mean, I love Pale Fire. That's a beautiful title. That's a perfect title. Elena Knows is unbelievable. Both what it suggests once you finish, but the way you start it, the way that title changes for you as you read it. You know, a lot of titles, I really like titles that are buried in the book somewhere, and you're reading along and suddenly you encounter the title of your book and it detonates and it the meaning kind of explodes and you're like, oh, something's happening in your head, epiphany or something. You know, not in a ham-handed way. It's not and you shall be the Fellowship of the Ring. I love that. It's one of my favorite movies, but that title drop is a little goofy. Here, Elena Knows is dropped, detonated multiple times. It's just da-da-da-da-da as Elena knows, da-da-da-da-da. And then it's used in different ways, Elena knows. And what she knows, because this is a novel about what we know and what we don't know, what we won't allow ourselves to know. It's an epistemological mystery, not what happened, what you can know about what happened, but what you can know about what you know. Facing some of the most difficult things, difficult truths of life, of the body, of family, of love. The title, as it continues to detonate until the end, when you have a new understanding, it's just one of the best titles. This book is a book full of truth, sympathy, hard truth, unpitying, or relentless, stunning. It is the best book I read as of January, right? It is the one to beat. It's a very strong 9. I'm going to be reading Pinheiro, much more of her in the future. Now, my media in January was all jumbled together, but February was organized a little differently. During the first 2 weeks of that month, we took a short trip down the river to the Three Gorges area, and I did the vast majority of my reading then, on trains and boats and in hotels. Shows and then games had to wait until we got home, so I'm going to talk about them together in this order, all the books together on this trip, then the shows, then the games. The first book I read in February was Half His Age by Jeanette McCurdy. This is a horror novel about a sexual relationship between a student, Waldo, and her high school English teacher. There's nothing sexy or romantic about this. It's nothing but a bad idea seen to its end. Almost kind of a reverse Lolita in that it prioritizes teenage truth-telling over middle-aged self-delusion. It's not a morality tale, but it's an honest, bracing look at such a relationship, told in McCurdy's dry, unsentimental, funny, merciless voice. Maybe in the end I wanted something slightly more from it, slightly deeper, but as it is, I think it's a strong 7. A good start to the month. And then, even better, the next book I read while we were traveling, mostly on a train in a hotel, was My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Moshfegh. This was a 9, very strong 9 to me. It's a little hard to explain why I love this book and found it so compelling. But somehow just the story of a young woman trying to sleep for a year, it just made sense to me. Even outside of depression, it made sense. She didn't really have to explain why. Moshfegh's writing is very, very strong. in its details, its accumulation of facts, the rhythms of its lists. Now, I have almost nothing in common with the main character here. And whenever she would step outside from her apartment where she's trying to sleep, whenever she stepped outside into society, then her wealth, her beauty, her snobbery, her callousness, they came to the forefront and they were pretty hard to bear, often infuriating. But that was rare because most of the time she's in her apartment trying to sleep. And inside, when I was there with her sleeping drugs and her TV shows and her unprocessed grief, I was just totally with her. The media here in My Year of Rest and Relaxation really stands out. I love reading about fictional people watching real TV shows and movies. You know, being obsessed with real stars. In this case, the main character is obsessed with Whoopi Goldberg. I really don't like when books, make up, a book about a video game and then make up a fake game. I just want them to say Mario, or just say what it, like, I don't like that kind of fakery. And here, this is all real stuff that the main character is watching while laying on her couch endlessly. I'll also say that this book did not go like I expected. The ending was not what I expected. This book is not a judgment of the main character. And I felt the ending was very strong, including the epilogue. This book also has one of my favorite characters of this year, the main character's friend, only friend really, Riva, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, R-E-V-A. Riva is a real person who is struggling in the main character's kind of unreal world. And I found her so moving, so sweet, so real, so awake. This book for me is up against Elena Knows as my favorite so far this year, a super strong 9 and a book that I just loved. The next book I read was The River Has Roots by Amal El Motar. And unfortunately, I thought it was a 2. This is a big turnaround after My Year of Rest and Relaxation. 2 means I strongly disliked it. Found little worthwhile. I was really surprised here by how bad I felt it was. I like modern fairy tales, or thought I did. And I was into the grammar magic of this book at first, though this turned out to be fake. It uses words like conjugation and grammar cheaply. It gets the word nerd in me excited, but there's absolutely nothing behind it, not any of it. As a novella, I found this both too long and too short. It has none of the compact power of a fairy tale and none of the depth or insight or plain characterization of a more elaborate tale. I'm into fairy borderlands, non-binary fairy lovers, especially the focus on sisters here. I love stories about sisters. But this book is really all just it's a romance disguised as a murder ballad, and neither one works. It's really like a kind of fairy wish fulfillment. And I don't know, tales of fairies are not wish fulfillment. The fae, the fair folk, are dangerous. They are threatening. They are inhuman. So this fantasy just felt ridiculous to me. The ending was preposterous, completely unearned, kind of dumb. I just found the whole book coy and precious and knowing and immature and kind of gross. The next book I read was The Morgue Keeper by Meng Ruyan. It is about a preparer of bodies, of corpses, of which there were many, during the Chinese Cultural Revolution. Now, this book is suffocatingly written. It's full of powerful details, but it reads like Cultural Revolution torture porn. It's not unbelievable. I've read a lot of scar literature, and I know the evils of that time. I know that places like Chongqing, where I live today, were horrible places to be during the Cultural Revolution. Terrible, evil things happened here. But this book looks down on all of it with a kind of conservative disgust. It's full of longing for a privileged past, and it has all these false details about poverty, like the main character weirdly always has this extra money lying around in ways that make no sense. As if the author, doesn't actually know what poverty is like. The novel's response in the end to all the pain and horror of the Cultural Revolution is really trite and maudlin. There are some powerful parts here in this novel, but in the end it's too easy. It's not introspective enough. It's not honest enough. And like I said, it's weirdly reactionary and condescending. So it was a 3 to me. Next, Vagabonds by Elosa Osunde is a story cycle about its title. Vagabonds are the outcasts of Lagos, the outlawed queer folks of the city. Osunde's prose is vivid and unpredictable. It makes these exciting imperative turns. It's both hard-nosed and hopeful. And it uses the connective tissue of gods between the stories as kind of a meta strategy that synthesizes without totalizing. But the book kind of lost steam for me about halfway through. The small stories subdivided into even smaller micro stories. The focus shifted too much to middle and upper class queer women, kind of limiting the original vision. And the whole thing became too programmatic, too about its vagabond title, in too pointed of a way. I guess I just felt like it didn't totally work in the end. But I did still like its fluidity with voice, with even levels of reality. So I felt it was a 6. Now, the next book I read was The Foreign Legion by Clarice Lispector. As I said in my last video, Lispector is perhaps my favorite prose writer. No prose is as singular, or as weird, or as broken, or as relentless, or as deep, or as inspiring, or as waking, really. And so I found myself with this book one February night at 2 a.m., kind of horrified. I'd read many amazing stories in this collection at the halfway point that I found myself. Especially there's one story called The Egg and the Chicken. Truly amazing. It uses the egg as an object of kind of philosophic investigation, phenomenological investigation, in the way a philosopher uses a table or a hammer or the redness of an apple. Here, she's using an egg, an object almost too pregnant with meaning, and her story both utterly strips it down, but also has the egg kind of obstinately pushing back. And we see it anew. It's really extraordinary. One of the best stories of hers I've read. And then shortly after that, I hit a story called The Solution. This is a nasty, cruel, 4-page story of fat phobia. There are so many little digs here, so many little cruel details about Elmira, the main character. And not from just other characters, but from the narrative itself. And I cannot stand it. I've struggled with my weight my whole life, with my body itself, in so many ways. And I've seen so many people struggle with theirs, too. And I just cannot tolerate such cruelty towards others, even of narrators towards characters. Clarice Lispector is famously beautiful and elegant. So I guess my most uncharitable reading of this story would be that this is just a flat failure on her part, a deep blind spot in her grasp of humanity, written with a kind of cruelty that's hard to fake, honestly. Maybe a more charitable reading would be to say that she is using fatness almost metaphorically, mystically as she does, and exploring how someone who is oversensitive, as Elmira is described as being in the story, how they make contact with the world through food, through their body. But if this is the case, I still find the story a failure. I think it's a flash fiction whose philosophic tendencies are simply outmatched by its human failures. I don't know. I can try to explain it away, but the story was just too horrible to me. It left me disappointed, deflated, kind of sick to my stomach. And I still can't shake this feeling now, that feeling when something you love disappoints you, some writer you love. I finished the rest of the collection kind of in the shadow of this story, and by that point they were mostly just marks on the page. I barely remember them. There are a lot of good pieces in The Foreign Legion. Like I said, The Egg and the Chicken is one of her best stories, but The Solution is her absolute worst. And the thing is, I remember The Solution much more than even The Egg now, months later. 4 pages out of 100 plus. This is a case where the number rating is a little hard for me to say. I can feel it shifting on different days, and it may again in the future, but I don't want to reread this anytime soon, even the excellent stories, so for now, it will remain a 3 to me. The last book I read in February was Nightbitch by Rachel Yoder. This is a novel about a young mother and artist becoming a wild dog. And it is another 2. Damn. A real failure, despite me liking the idea here. I mean, that's why I read it. Nightbitch is deeply relatable as both a parent and as an artist, a writer. And yet it doesn't go deep enough. It doesn't go anywhere, really. It all feels, the whole novel feels so overdetermined. I can feel its thesis informing every narrative choice. There's nothing organic or surprising or alive here. Nightbitch is a novel that thinks it's dangerous, but it is not. Not at all. And I think a lot of this comes down to the prose, the Midwestern, suburban, MFA prose. I guess I would call it pedestrian writing about vital things. And what I think this book needs is something like a kind of feral prose, something truly unhinged. It's been a long time for me since the divide between what a book is about and how it is about it has been so stark, where I'm right there with the premise, with the problem, but I am so not with the execution or the solution. Yeah, a terrible two. The first show that I finished in February, I started in January, but I finished in February A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, based on George R.R. Martin's Dunk and Egg novellas. And this was a real surprise for me. It is such a warm, funny, sensitive, irreverent show, full of regret, questions about this life, how to live it, Sir Duncan's decency, and this feel for the small folk looking out for each other they're both so wonderful. I've dreamed of this focus on small folk in Game of Thrones for a long time. My only real disappointment came with learning who Egg is. I find proximity to power can have really ruinous effects on narrative. So I was worried at the end of this season as Dunk and Egg rode off into season 2 and into history. Still, as it is, this season is a very solid 8. The other show that I watched in February was Season 1 of Good Times. This show came out in 1974, which was before my time, and I grew up seeing a few reruns and really only knowing the theme song, which is an all-timer. I've recently been kind of recognizing my deep love for sitcoms, and I'm increasingly wanting to know more of its history. And this first season of Good Times is absolutely amazing. It is a stone-cold 9. It is so sharp and funny and moving. It's got wonderful vibes, amazing fashion, the best laughs, and the characters are just always hugging on each other. And the chemistry of the parents, Florida and James, is fantastic, and their chemistry with the kids as well. Like Maude, which I loved last year, Good Times has fantastic fights, but these fights are more grounded, more difficult, and I found more moving than even those in Maude. Good Times is always keeping it real. There are plots that deal with James struggling with his lack of education as he tries to work 2 jobs, work nights, and improve things for himself and his family. Yeah, it's really powerful. This show just takes up the problem of having principles and dignity while facing unfair systems and crushing circumstances. It's a show of very painful hopes and constantly tempered expectations that come with poverty and just living while black in America. Structurally, I found the show very impressive as well. This can be one of the comforts of great sitcoms, wrapping things up, in 20, 25 minutes. Good Times has such elegant solutions at the end of each episode. Not happy endings, but in how they deal with disappointment, they find endings that are true and resonant and sharp. They feel effortless, though they're not. They're clearly very effortful. They're always funny. I can feel the influence of Good Times in favorite shows of mine, like Cheers and Roseanne. And I wanted to watch more after season 1, but as I looked into it, I heard that later seasons steeply declined. James is fired, Florida quits. The show really leans into JJ's antics and kind of loses itself trying to give audiences what they want. So I don't know when that happens exactly. I'm going to think on it a bit before I go any further. But still, this first season is one of the best first seasons of a sitcom I've ever seen. It's an easy, extraordinary 9. I also played 2 games in February. The first was Strange Jigsaws, and I thought it was a 6. I liked it. No regrets playing it. No real strong feelings either. It had surprising reach and variety. It's virtual jigsaw puzzles, a lot of variety. It had a few annoying puzzles, those kind of order of operations, reverse engineering puzzles that I've done 1,000 times, but not too many. And it did have a number of quite cool, expressive ones that you would put together in your mind, not just on screen. It had some meta elements too, connecting all the puzzles that I found charming rather than irritating. So yeah, I liked it, but I don't have much more to say. Instead, what I would like to do is just give a shout out to the review that drew my attention to this game by Tom Chick of quarter-to-3.com. Tom is one of my favorite game critics and has been for a long time. His review of this game made me try it. He had a far more profound experience than I did. He liked it a lot more. But, that's fine. My tastes don't often align with Tom's. It doesn't matter. He's one of the very best game critics out there, period. And he has been for decades. He was a great game critic when I started like 15 years ago, and he's continued. He's super honest. He is funny. He is thoughtful, very intelligent. He's a great lively writer, his prose. He uses the full scale of rating things 1 to 10, or 1 to 5 in his case. He uses a 5-point scale. He pays no mind to discourse or other reviews, and he just goes all in on his experience with games. He's still just absolutely one of the best. He's an older critic, though, like me, and I do want to say something about some younger critics that I've actually been watching recently. I don't know a lot of younger critics, but I've been watching a YouTube channel called Critical Error with Jake Steinberg and Peter Spetek. And the two of them have these really pointed, vital conversations every week about games criticism, about a lot of topics in games criticism. I find their conversations dynamic and honest and exciting. So between them and Tom Chick still doing great work, it gives me, a little hope for games criticism. I don't have a lot, but those guys, they're helping. Finally, the other game that I played in February was Mewgenics. This was a 4. I didn't really like it. Sadly, I have very little to say about this game. I was excited about it. It's Edmund Macmillan's new game after Isaac. I had a profound experience with Isaac last year. With Mewgenics, I did not even beat it, despite putting dozens and dozens of hours into it. I'll never see the end. Because, though I found the game, while playing it, very, very absorbing, I also found it completely exhausting. So much of my attention, it just swallowed my attention in a bad way. It consumed it by forcing me to focus on every detail of the tactics, controlling, micromanaging every little thing. I could hardly think about anything else while playing, or even think about the game in a deeper way. I couldn't dwell in the catness of it, or its ideas about disability, or the nature of Mewgenics versus the nurture of Isaac. The game is too conscious versus the unconscious of Isaac. I think I made more choices like in a single battle in Mewgenics than in an entire run of Isaac. In Isaac you make choices and then you play them out. But in Mewgenics, the ratio of thinking to doing felt totally off to me, as in many tactics games. Nothing is ever finished in Mewgenics. It is endless tactics. And to me, tactics without end, without something more, without purpose really, is a true nightmare. I'd look at the metagame of Mewgenics, the cat requirements for your house or for the shops or different things, and I just wanted to go to sleep. Mewgenics has interesting ideas and some surprising combos and synergies, but it all felt very narrow and fragile, and it was a slog to pull things off. So it was a game that just left me absolutely exhausted and spent. So moving into March, February was rough compared to January especially. And in March, my media is mixed up again. It was not divided as in February. I was really hoping things might take a turn in March, especially with books and games. Try to get back to January. The first book I read in March was There Is No Antimemetics Division by Quantum. That's a pseudonym. And it was a 2. Another 2. Oh man, another total failure to me. This book was a lot of fun at first. It's got this cool notion of anti-memes, which are like these entities that hide in plain sight by denying our knowledge of them, by erasing our memory. So it starts out kind of as like a short story collection, which makes sense. These are like stories in the same universe that can't remember each other. The anti-memes are working. And anti-memes kind of make a novel impossible. The wholeness, the totality, the coherence of a novel. The project of a novel generally requires memory, connection, knowability. The novel is a particular kind of epistemological entity, right? And then this book of short stories becomes a novel, a totally conventional one in the last third, and a total disaster as a novel. What it reveals when it starts to remember things and put it together is that behind all these memes and anti-memes, there's nothing really there. There's a vagueness that it's been hiding behind, and it goes to the very heart of the problem of this book, because there's no detail in the end. There's only vague ideas. Ideas, anti-ideas, they're all tremendously vague when it comes down to it. Instead, you have this like derpy little science fiction tale of running and trying to save something. Oh, terrible, terrible. You know, if science fiction is the literature of ideas, then this book is kind of the very worst of that. It exposes ideas for the airless things that they are. It got me thinking a lot because of the title and because of these anti-memes. I started thinking, what's the opposite of an idea? Not an anti-idea, or not a meme versus an anti-meme as in this book. No, I think the opposite of idea is something more like a happening, maybe a body, materiality, time. Time is not just an idea in lived experience. Reality is not just an idea when you experience it. I thought to myself, actually, I think the ultimate opposite of an idea is a person. And here, there is no antimemetics division. There are no persons. There are none. The first game I played in March was Flesh and Pressure. This is a messy trans girl slice of life game. I think it was created for a Toxic Yuri jam. It combines very raw feelings with an aesthetic confidence that I really appreciated. So we have like these sickly neon colors and strong character work, and these really funny, sobering chapter title cards. The central fantasy in here is about being crushed by an industrial trash compactor. And I gotta say, this just made sense to me. Like Sleeping for a Year made sense in Moshe Fei's novel. Or like Cutting makes sense to me in real life. Flesh and Pressure isn't quite fully realized as it is. The last half kind of just evaporates. But I liked it as a strong 6, almost a 7. It's very promising, and I'm looking forward to future games by this artist, Lexi. Next, I read The Hedge Knight by George R.R. Martin, which is the basis, as I said, for A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. And it was fine. Extremely fine. I didn't have really strong feelings, which to me is a slight negative. So it was fine, like a 5. Honestly, I might forget this novella without the show. Everything in it is too slight, and the competing interiorities, which made, A Song of Ice and Fire so striking, so compelling, they are missing here. And really, this leaves me just even more impressed with the show. Next, The Highest Exam by Jia Ruishui and Li Hongbing examines the all-important college entrance exam in China, the Gaokao. This book is insightful, connecting the Gaokao to both the imperial exams in Chinese history and the workings of the Chinese government today. I've long thought the Gaokao was, at heart, an obedience test, and kind of the scaffolding, really, of so many of the problems with hierarchy and competition in China. But I really wanted this book to go further, to analyze the test itself, and to consider life outside it. And this book needs much better editing. The prose is repetitive, the chapters feel cobbled together, it's not a cohesive book. It does have solid information, but I found it to be a pretty compromised critique. For me, that's a 4. The first show that I finished in March was Season 1 of Star Trek Starfleet Academy. And this was an 8, a somewhat unusual 8 for me, because it's extremely imperfect. There are major elements that still frustrate me, and yet I really enjoyed it. And as a new vision of Star Trek, I do think it's very successful. Some of the bad up front, this show has the most obnoxious lighting I can remember seeing in forever. It is bad coloring. It creates this unreal fantasy land. Yeah, it's terrible. The main character, Caleb, is a little flat. He's all right, but... and I think the show is still too in love with genius, the way that Star Trek can be. The first few episodes is kind of a rough start, but then the Klingons come into focus, and it really steps up. Klingons now, in the 32nd century, are refugees. They are proud and adrift in the universe post-burn. This is the burn happened, which is this cataclysm in the far future. In this 32nd century, the Federation is really trying to redefine itself for the new era. with a better understanding of its own colonialism and kind of paternalistic charity. And the Federation is kind of decentering humans and Earth in really interesting ways. Kind of trying to really overturn the old order. The scarred adults who lived in the burn and the post-burn world, they cannot overturn this order on their own. They really struggle to move on from life defined by the burn. They need these students. They need this true next generation. I really liked many of the characters in this show. Jaden, the Klingon student, he is a gorgeous man and a gorgeous Klingon. Genesis, Lurathak, Captain Ake, played by Holly Hunter. She's a different kind of captain than I've ever seen. Pretty wonderful. Sam and the Doctor are photonics. These are like hologram characters, a new kind of life form, really kind of taken more seriously than just the Doctor in Voyager. Jet Reno, she is great. She gets a moment as captain at one point. It's really, really wonderful. And some of what these characters do can at times feel hokey or corny, a little juvenile if it were in other Star Trek shows. But it works here because of the subject. It is Starfleet Academy. It is space college. And there's an earnestness to the college age that this show really captures well. And it uses the format of the class structure, not in an overly didactic way, but to create kind of these unreal situations and trials, which Star Trek loves anyway. And it makes the progressive thrust of the whole show really work. Because these are not adults acting YA, as in like Star Trek Discovery, but actual young adults. There's just a real love of students in Starfleet Academy, a love of that age, imperfect and goofy, where everything is so meaningful and change is in the air everywhere. I too love my students who are so serious and so earnest and so hungry for change. And so yeah, flaws and all, I just really like Starfleet Academy. The next book I read was called Game Poems by Jordan Magnusson, and I came out of reading it both very excited and kind of frustrated. Excited because of the subject itself, game poems, and Magnusson's clear enthusiasm for the subject. The tools and resources that he offers are great, even if some of his advice is a little too general. But I was frustrated by the limits of this book. One, it has this anxious tone that is too worried about legitimacy when I wanted something a little bolder and more ambitious. Two, the scope of the book is a little too narrow about what even counts as game poetry. I'm just as interested in the lyric or poetic as an approach to game playing, all sorts of games, rather than just the game poem as an object itself. And three, the actual game poem examples here are a little underwhelming. I've played some exceptions like Novena and The Old City of High Walls, but I think the book needed some wilder, weirder examples of game poems. Still, I did like it. I just wanted more, so it was a 6. The next show that I finished in March was Season 3 of Primal, and this was a 3. The first show to really disappoint me this winter. I had a good run of shows. And it disappointed me once I understood what this season was doing. The first half of the season has some of the strongest run of episodes since the first season. There is such thematic resonance. It's a meditation on death. The first 2 seasons focused on life surrounded by constant death. And this season, at least the beginning, is focused on death surrounded by life. Spear, who has been brought back to life from clear death at the end of season 2, he is undead and he is heavy. He is constantly falling down into the underworld. Not the metaphysical underworld, but underground. He's falling underground constantly, like the Earth's trying to reclaim him. And there's a repeated struggle to break free. Many of the creatures that he encounters are dirt or cave dwellers, creatures that are fundamentally under. This is a kind of zombie story of loneliness and isolation, of trying to get back to these vague feelings, these roars, these connections. But then, about halfway through, as Spear does reconnect to Mira and Fang, it becomes clear what this season is actually doing. Season 3 is a season-long retcon of the last shot of Season 2, a shot without Spear. So not only does this undermine the strength of the early episodes of the meditation on death, But it's really out of place in the Primal universe, this revised happy ending. I didn't like season 2 much myself, nor the ending. Not what happened, Spear dying was okay, but how it unfolded I didn't think was great. But I never wanted Tartakovsky to correct it. Online, after I watched this, I saw that some fan backlash had turned to rejoicing at season 3. And I saw ludicrous comments about Spear having earned this happy ending. He went through so much. He worked so hard. What? As if these characters are our friends and we want everyone to be happy. I love characters in fictions, deeply. But they are not my friends, and I do not want all happy endings, especially if that's against the very ethos of the show. This show is called Primal. Primal, with teeth. Not super dinosaur friends. Any conventional moralism of fairness or nuclear families or having earned it goes directly against what makes Primal so powerful, at least in its best episodes. I don't think season 3 is a total failure. Episode to episode, there is some real darkness and some real pathos here. But as an entire retcon project, I found it completely wrong-headed and terrible, and thus a 3. Now, with the next book I read, I want to say it takes a special kind of talent, a special kind of intelligence, a special kind of empathy, even, to create something this bad. Vigil by George Saunders is not just a 1 to me. It's honestly one of the worst books I've read in a very long time. I keep trying to figure out what happened here. How could a, by all accounts, lovely man, an extremely talented writer, write one of the worst books in years? I loved Pastoralia. That was the first collection of his I read. I loved 10th of December. For a while there, Sea Oak was one of my favorite short stories, period. I tried Lincoln in the Bardo, but I didn't make it very far. And then Liberation Day, a few years ago, I found really patronizing and corny. So I didn't even expect that much with Vigil. Even so, I was not prepared for the depths of its badness. Vigil is about a kind of angel named Jill, and her job is to visit dying people in their final hours, to comfort them primarily, but also to get them to face their lives and maybe reach some sort of absolution. So who is Jill attending to in Vigil? This is the first problem for me, the very premise of this book. Her charge is named Boone, and he's an oil company executive. And not just like a random CEO, but someone who directly saw to the ruining of our planet in the novel. He scuttled real environmental research, he produced false research instead, and he knew what he was doing. So my response to questions about the state of this CEO's immortal soul is, who gives a fuck? Really, why in the world am I supposed to care about this? The fundamental premise of this novel fails because I do not care. I don't want to understand a rich man, a CEO, a world murderer. I don't want to understand Elon Musk. I want him dead. I want someone to Luigi that motherfucker. No suffering, but dead to this world. No wealth, no power, no influence, no voice. Gone. Just gone. Now, Saunders is famous for his empathy, but I think this is totally misplaced empathy in Vigil. He could write about anyone in the world. So why Boone? Why this bland little CEO? Saunders doesn't even get that up close and personal with him. He keeps Boone and his crime at a distance. It's a very abstract planet ruination. And he gives Boone a classic conservative origin story, up by his bootstraps, that no one takes seriously anymore. While reading this, I kept imagining what the book would feel like if Saunders had created someone whose crimes were closer, someone more viscerally reprehensible. Like if Jill was at the deathbed of an unrepentant rapist, or an unrepentant president, or an unrepentant rapist president. But then, I don't think George Saunders could actually stomach that or write a book about that. Saunders used to be so good at writing about the disempowered. He could evoke the inner life of everyday people under tremendous pressure with grace and humor and verbal bravado like no one else. So I don't know what happened. Has Saunders been too successful the past 15 years? Has he been among the elite, literary and otherwise, for too long? I don't know. There's also something that stinks of just being a good liberal in this novel. Saying like, see, I can empathize with not just the least of these, but with the most of these. Which, of course, I find both nauseating and totally out of step with our current world. Empathizing with the powerful is not really empathy at all. It's something closer to fantasy. It feels good. It comforts us. It flatters us. It assures us of our own high-minded goodness, and it often lets them off the hook. They go low, but I go high. It changes absolutely nothing. So, Vigil asks the wrong questions, but let's say I can put that aside for now and listen to the novel's answers. Well, what I find is that the answers are even worse than the questions. Before I get into what those answers are, let me just say quickly that how they are answered is also terrible. Saunders' writing here in Vigil is corny and patronizing and way too cute, as it was in his last collection. I'm kind of afraid to go back to his old work now and find out if they suffer kind of similarly, because it's not like his writing style has changed that dramatically. The only positive thing I can say about the book's execution is its brevity. It is very short, thank God. But back to those answers. There are three main things that the book continually returns to and ends on that I find not just wrong-headed, but fundamentally false. Number one, Jill refers again and again to people and their actions as inevitable occurrences. Inevitable occurrences. That we are who we are and we do what we do because of circumstances beyond our control. They are in fact so far beyond our control that it would be, to quote the novel, impossible, even ludicrous, to pass judgment. Inevitable occurrences. It got me thinking as I read. I wondered, is rape an inevitable occurrence? Not just inevitable in a patriarchal world, but each individual rape, are they inevitable? Is there no blaming a rapist? Or is it an inevitable occurrence that the U.S. bombed a school in Iran and murdered over 100 school children? Is it ludicrous to pass judgment on this? Can Jill, from her elevated vantage point, see what limited, earthy, stupid humans like me cannot see? I fucking hate this high-minded bullshit. This is not wisdom. This is old-fashioned determinism. This is the logic of destiny. This is an excuse. This is cowardice. This is defeat. Vigil's understanding of life, of choice, of suffering, follows a mechanistic version of science and philosophy that is so simplistic and so false. Number two, instead of judgment because of these inevitable occurrences that we are, the book offers another idea, and that is comfort. Not comfort the noun, but comfort the verb, to comfort. Jill's primary directive is to comfort the dying as they pass on. Comfort, we hear again and again, because all else is futility. And this is not just for Boone, the CEO, but in the end, it's even for Jill's own killer as well, because her life too was cut short by a vengeful, petty little man. She was blown up, and her killer went on to live a long, lonely life, unrepentant. Now, comforting others, even the worst of us, I can see merit in. I don't have it in me to be cruel to someone who would be dying in front of me. I would probably tell them that it would be okay too. But this is not something to build an ethics around, or a novel. This too sounds like comfort as defeat. The novel kind of says so directly, for all else is futility. That's a quote. In the hokey system of this novel, comfort comes off not like some deep expression of love for humanity, but instead like throwing your hands up in the air. Like, what are you going to do with these fuckers? Comfort them, I reckon. This is a cheap, maudlin sort of comfort, a nihilistic comfort, a comfort that is fundamentally false. That word again, I keep thinking false. I find this novel so false. And this leads to number 3. How does Saunders finally make sense of these inevitable occurrences and comfort imperatives? How are they even possible for us, blaming biased humans? The answer in the book is obvious. We are the problem. More specifically, our sense of self. We must rid ourselves of our sense of self to see and act in an elevated way, as Jill puts it. And by this point in the novel, when I see where it's going, when I see what it's pointing towards, I just feel so tired. No self, having no self, eliminating this self, is a delusion. It doesn't matter if it's coming from a Buddhist or a Jedi or George Saunders. I've read the sacred texts. I've heard the wisdom. And no, just no. It's not achievable for one, certainly not for most people. And more importantly, it's not desirable. You're giving up the whole human game, giving up the self. Baby and bathwater both. It's like the end of Journey to the West, I complained about in my last video. You reach the end, you ascend, the end of humanity, the end of storytelling, the end of self. And I gotta say, this concept of eliminating yourself, of having no self, reads to me so masculine. It's so coded that way to me. Telling Jill that herself is the problem. No, it's actually worse. She is telling herself that herself is the problem. It's fucking creepy. I think, try having any man tell any woman that herself is the problem. And I think the wisdom palace just collapses. If I were to tell my daughter, baby, it's yourself that's the problem. I know you're building that self every day, day by day, but one day you'll see the wisdom of throwing it all away, throwing yourself away. I mean, Jesus Christ. Saunders is betraying what he's particularly good at in his past work. These evoked selves, their experience of life. The first short story in 10th of December is called Victory Lap. And the presence of life, bright teenage girl life, in the face of evil, male evil in that story, is so powerful, so exuberant, so ecstatic. It's beautiful. By contrast, this book, it just feels like a defeat. It feels like plain giving up. So the answers Vigil offers are a trifecta of bad wisdom. A little bit of deterministic science, a little bit of Hallmark schmaltz, and a little bit of Buddhism. Vigil is a cloying birthday card about a clockwork universe given to us by no one. Now, I can imagine a reading that is not quite so damning, and it would start kind of like this. Jill is not George Saunders. Don't confuse author and character. She does not speak for him. This is a novel, not a treatise. And of course, Jill is not George. That's true. And this is a novel, also true. But then I have to ask, so how are we to read her in all this bad wisdom? As an unreliable narrator? A deluded soul herself? Okay, maybe. The trouble is, there's not much in the novel to pursue this line of thinking with. There's very little alternative to Jill in the economy of the novel. There is a Frenchman angel, he's called the Frenchman, that she spars with, a fellow angel, but his pushback is pretty piecemeal and very weak in the end. There's no alternative in the world itself, no grounding, no narrative irony, nothing solid by which to test much of anything that Jill thinks or says as true or false. Jill is floating in metaphysical space throughout the novel, unmoored, by design. And the metaphysics of Vigil are dopey and vague. The whole tone of the novel, too, the moral seriousness and the goofball solemnity, it doesn't support many alternative readings at all. The novel's one virtue, its brevity, really doesn't give room to seriously ponder any alternatives. It's like this novel should have never gone there being the afterlife. This cruel world, our cruel world, is enough. It's plenty. If you're going to invoke a world beyond death, you best not miss. Or at the very least, you better be interesting. Not ask bad questions and then answer them with hoary cliches and golly gee defeat. I don't doubt George Saunders' empathy at all. Vigil reads like it was written by someone horrified by what's going on everywhere. Like someone trying to escape this planet into some sense-making afterlife. So I don't doubt his empathy or sensitivity. I doubt where that empathy is placed. And I judge the work of art it has led him to create. Saunders wrangled with the world, and this time, I think he lost. He lost bad. Vigil reads like a testimony of defeat. And I gotta say, weirdly enough, I feel kind of grateful to read this defeat. Sometimes we fail. Sometimes even great writers, even lovely people, fail. This rating of 1 I give Vigil is a different kind of failure than the 2s of those other books in February and early March. It's a more ambitious failure, a more profound failure. And I'm grateful for such profundity these days. Especially these days, it can feel like we're not allowed to fail this badly. With the worst of us running amok, it can feel like the stakes are always too high. But I don't want to give up the opportunity to fail, to fall flat on our faces again and again. Especially not in a novel, not in art, not even in reading art. I don't want to give up the possibility that I could fail in my own reading, that I'm really misreading this. And so I find something weirdly moving in a failure as colossal as Vigil. I can see the world and myself more clearly in its wake, in its defeat. These sorts of works just don't come along that often for me. And so, in rating it a 1, I want to honor its defeat. After this absolute low point with Vigil, I needed something good, and Gabby's Dollhouse helped turn things around a little bit. My daughter got into Gabby this winter, and Gabby herself is played by a very charismatic and sweet actress. She's kind of a preteen cat lady who feels like a YouTuber in that she creates a whole world in her bedroom, a world that's been catified. Like Gabby has some real cat monomania. I suppose I wouldn't watch Gabby on my own, like Bluey or My Little Pony. But I definitely never minded when it was on. I enjoyed watching it with my daughter. And it has the best songs of just about any kid show I've seen. So I think it was a very charming 7. The next book I read was Hell Has No Limits by Jose Donoso, translated by Suzanne Jill Levine. This novel is both experimental and propulsive. I was really impressed with how skillful Donoso is with drama, with scenes, with a very subtle but strong structure, all while doing this really challenging play with pronouns. We might understand the main character, La Manuela, to be trans, but she doesn't always see herself this way in the novel, and her pronouns will shift mid-paragraph, sometimes mid-sentence, depending on who she's talking to, how they see her, and how she's feeling about herself in a given moment. It's a painful book, but an invigorating one. I think it was an 8. The last book I read in March was China Pop by Jia Jianying, and I think this was an 8. I really, really enjoyed reading this. Jia writes with such appealing prose, with such intelligence and thoughtfulness and energy. China Pop is about the rise of pop culture and capitalism following the Tiananmen Square massacre. It offers a really vivid portrait of early to mid-90s China. I think the only weakness here is Jia's connection. She seems to know everyone at the top. She can easily arrange interviews with like Chen Kaige or Jia Pinghua or millionaire CEOs. Her old classmates are all enmeshed in the elite, so her perspective, though very insightful, is sometimes limited. I found the book most compelling whenever she would dip into the lives of people actually experiencing this new pop culture, such as a chapter about a retired teacher whose marriage has kind of gone dead, but it's briefly revived every night by the ritual of watching Yearning, a wildly popular soap opera of the time. Honestly, I wish Jia would write about the past 10 to 15 years in China, its pop culture and internet culture, rising amidst an even more authoritarian regime than that of the 90s. This is the regime my students have grown up in, and I think that she could really offer some insights if she stuck to the people and not with those in power. because the world she describes in China Pop has fully blossomed now. The last game I played in March was Perfect Tide's Station to Station, and it is a clear 9, one of the very best games of this year. It's also one of the best written games I've ever played, especially in terms of character writing. Its ability to evoke both Mara's reality and the reality of other people, especially as these realities collide, is really extraordinary. The small moments it focuses on are perfectly chosen. The relationships it describes are so painful and true. There is a long-distance relationship in the first season with Adam that almost gave me a panic attack. So many of the boys around Mara are like boys that my students, the young women in my classes, would call confident but common. This is a translation into English of a phrase they use, confident but common. You know, all those boys on campus who are just kind of coasting on patriarchy. Mara meets a lot of those. Station to Station has this whole mechanic about the developing writer brain. And honestly, I wish there was even more to this in the game. I love to read books in games and see how that affects my mind, my character's mind, if not their stats. There's just this maturity to Station that is very uncommon in games. It is looking back at college life with clear eyes, clear perspective, while never discounting old feelings or, condescending about those feelings. It honors those feelings, all the self-doubts and delusions and justification. It goes all in with them and makes us feel them, too. I think maybe what impresses me most is the feel that Meredith Gran, the creator here, has for all the people who are not Mara, who are not like her, not obsessed with art or with themselves. There is this really deep affection and respect for the reality of other people in Station to Station. And this game rightly understands that an artist's education requires facing the reality of others as much as it requires understanding yourself. Carolyn Pettit has a really wonderful article on Kotaku that talks about this. Let me add, while the Station to Station title is very good, the title drop that happens near the end is what really floored me. It's so real. It's not a David Bowie reference like I first thought. I'll just say that Station to Station is a game that understands desire like very few other games I've played. As I think it's obvious here, I care about titles, right? I really care about them. I notice them. I care about both the way that they name the work and how they are deployed in the work, what work they do. It's not make or break for me. A great title won't save something that I don't like, nor will a bad title, sink something. This is quite obvious in the last artwork I experienced this winter. That was the show Journal with Witch. Now, the English title both trips the tongue, Journal with Witch, and it evokes the show poorly, and it's just kind of an ugly title. Only that slight oddity of a missing article before witch and the weirdness of that preposition with is at all interesting. Bad title aside, though, I really felt so lucky to end the season with Journal with Witch. It is an extraordinary anime, one of the best I've seen, up there with Chihaya Furu, Evangelion, and Revolutionary Girl Utena. In it, a 15-year-old girl's parents die suddenly, and her aunt, who is a novelist, deeply introverted, probably on the spectrum, and who hates her sister who just died, takes in her sister's daughter, her niece, and takes care of her. The novelist's aunt is named Makio. She's one of the most amazing characters of the year. She remains exactly who she is throughout, unapologetically, and yet she really tries to be there for Asa. Asa herself is remarkably ordinary. Not just a blank slate, but a lost soul. She's a grieving child. She's a teenager. I love how annoying this show lets Asa be. She really is sometimes. This feels true to me, both to the age and to her character, and to the strange roundabout way that grief works through us. We never learn exactly what went down between Makio and her sister, and this is for the best. But we do see some of the dynamics between Makio and Asa, and can guess. There is a fundamental tension in Journal with Witch between those who live for others and those who live for themselves. Not along a selfish, unselfish axis, but along that of how you see yourself, your identity. Do you define who you are, or do others define you? Is your inner world primary, or is the outer world of other people primary? This is a normal teenage question, but also one of introversion and extroversion, and nerd and normie. I think one of the truly remarkable aspects of Journal with Witch is its view of its characters, its openness to everyone. Minor characters abound, for both Makio and Asa, and each is treated with dignity and respect. As good as Makio is, the show might do even better with the more neurotypical characters, like her ex. Her ex is amazing, somehow. And Asa's best friend, Emery, she is trying to understand her love of girls, and she's a character that Asa makes many mistakes with. The show just has such a feel for other people, the reality of everyone. Journal with Witch is very much like Station to Station in this way. Both have this almost Tolstoy-like quality in their evocation and respect for the reality of others. The structure of Journal with Witch is very affecting too. Its repetitions and cross-cuttings, its rhythms, and at times its meditations. It's a slice of life show that really does slice up life and then put it back together in very moving, surprising ways. Very, very moving. I cried just about every single episode of Journal with Witch, especially at the end. Makio, towards the end, kind of steps back. She's very attractive, very compelling as a character, but she steps back as Asa steps forward. In the end, someone tells Asa in English, a la Fury Road, "I witness you." It's very so moving. But really, the show witnesses all of its characters. And in that weird way that media is not just something we see, but we can feel seen by. I felt witnessed by Journal with Witch. I see it, and I feel seen, too. If it wasn't already obvious, Journal with Witch is a 10. It's an all-timer to me. Now, I do give myself some room at the end of the year to adjust my rating slightly, no more than a point in either direction. It's the end of the year, that's the time I really let them go, let the numbers stand. So, I do wonder if Baby Steps and Journal with Witch will remain 10s, if they will hold. Maybe a few others will cool down or heat up a bit with time. I'm pretty confident Vigil's going to stay a 1. Won't be anything but a 1. But we'll see. To give a little preview for the next video, my spring catalog, I read a bunch of Star Wars novels, my first Star Wars novels ever. I read a bunch of Chinese books, and I read the newest Dungeon Crawler Carl, A Parade of Horribles. Show-wise, I watched some sophomore seasons, I watched some series finales, and I rewatched some old favorites. Game-wise, I replayed an old favorite, Super Mario 3, and I played a sequel to an old favorite, Metroid. I played Metroid 2, which I never had before. I played a game as Elon Musk, and I played a game as Jesus Christ. And for hours and hours and days and weeks and months, I played Crimson Desert. The whole spring, I played Crimson Desert. So I have a lot to say about that game. So after the spring catalog, I'm going to be finally putting out that argument video that I've been thinking about and working on for a very long time. And so, yeah, until those next videos, thank you for listening.